This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a new insurance commissioner for the first time in more than 20 years. What are Patty Kuderer's priorities, and how is she sizing up the insurance implications from the California fires? Plus, State Representative Clyde Shavers on regulating artificial intelligence.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. Washington State has a sprawling artificial intelligence task force that is examining both the potential benefits and challenges presented by AI. But one state representative isn't waiting around for the task force to make its recommendations to the legislature. In our second half, we'll talk with Democrat Clyde Shavers about his proposed AI regulations for the 2025 session. But first, Washington State has not had a new insurance commissioner in a generation. Former state senator Patty Kuderer has now officially taken over the reins from longtime Commissioner Mike Kreidler. What are her priorities and what changes does she plan to bring to the office? Joining me now is newly sworn in State Insurance Commissioner Patty Kuderer. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
So I want to start with the California wildfires because that news has been front and center for the last several weeks. And I'm interested in the implications to the homeowners insurance marketplace. When you have 12,000 homes destroyed sort of in the matter of 48 hours, and it's a system or an insurance market that's already wobbly, what are you preparing for? What are you thinking about in terms of how this could, in the short term, affect Washington homeowners, and then sort of in the long term?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that California is a wake-up call for us. And I think that it is a natural consequence, if you will, of years and years and years of inaction at the federal level on the risk that climate change is posing. The insurance industry has been engaged in monitoring the changes in the climate for quite some time now. They have climatologists on staff. They have some of the best experts around that are mapping out where these catastrophes could happen. And they're making business decisions based on that. And I think for us, we have to be much more proactive. We have to be more prevention-minded, if you will. We have to be thinking more in terms of investing in resilient infrastructure, and risk mitigation. And I'm not talking, Austin, just individual homes. I'm talking about whole communities that need to be fortified and strengthened. And then within those communities, protecting individual homes. Because as you saw with the California wildfires, there were some homes that were still standing after the fire. They were the ones that did invest in those risk mitigation strategies. But who wants to go back to that? And that just underscores the need to do this at a community level as well. And I can tell you that, one of the things that we're thinking about at the OIC is establishing a grant program for communities and homeowners to fortify their homes, to invest more in fire prevention and disaster prevention strategies.
So those are things that could be done sort of proactively. And as you say, the fires in California can serve as a wake-up call. I'm interested in how destabilizing you think the fires and the losses are going to be for the property casualty insurance marketplace. Will there be ripple effects? Will homeowners here be paying more to help pay for those billions of dollars of losses? What does that start to look like?
Well, the premiums in Washington are supposed to be based on the risk in Washington, which again is why I think it's really important to invest in prevention. So we'll be looking at the rate increases, and of course it's going to have an impact. I think you're going to see insurance companies thinking twice about insuring in certain areas, and you might see more of them non-renewing individual homeowners that are building in places that might be more susceptible to wildfires. And that is a business decision that they're going to be making, and that's why it's incumbent upon us, both at the OIC and at the legislature, to be looking at how we help local communities guard against this risk.
State Farm, according to Marketplace, has already paused all non-renewals in LA County for a year. Some insurance companies had already pulled out of the state. Last year, State Farm discontinued coverage for 72,000 dwellings in California and dropped 70% of its market share in Pacific Palisades specifically. that very hard-hit area. In 2023, 7 of 12 of the largest insurers paused or restricted new policies in California. That was according to Fast Company. Have we seen anything similar here in Washington even before these fires?
Not to that extent, but we are seeing some insurers looking at certain areas and pulling back a bit. We haven't seen any insurance companies actually leave our state. But California is in a very difficult situation, and a lot of homeowners in California are on their FAIR plan. Many states have a FAIR plan, which is where the state insures against the risk, and it's really considered the insurer of last resort. You know, they have over 400,000 policies on their FAIR plan. By contrast, we have like 250 or less than, 250 to 300 policies. So very, very low. I want to keep it that way. And it's also used in our state more in a transitory way. So people will go on the FAIR plan if they're non-renewed until they find something else. We still have, a competitive market. But that doesn't mean that it isn't hard for some homeowners, especially in those areas that all the insurers are saying, it's a little too risky for us. And I think that we need to be much more mindful, like I said, of the overall risk and be educating consumers on what they can do to bring down their wildfire risk score so that they can remain insured.
You mentioned the idea of a grant program. I know that there are already such programs for fire. I think they're Firewise community grants. Is there a conversation you are starting to have or intend to have with the state legislature this session in sort of direct response to what's happened in California?
Yes, and also with the DNR. I think that we all are interested parties here in terms of making sure that Washington doesn't end up in the same situation as California. So there is a bill in the legislature right now to establish a grant program. I believe that it is Representative Reeves who has that, and be looking at that bill. And also, like I said, looking to how do we establish this in a way that gets the money where it needs to go in areas that are more prone initially, so that we can start fortifying those communities first.
And while we're not California, it's worth noting, important to note, we did lose an entire town, the town of Malden.
Yes, we did.
We saw devastating fires in the Spokane area, a devastating fire, I believe this past summer. It does happen here, and our climate is changing. Fire risk is very high in the summer months. So it doesn't seem like we're certainly not exempt from this danger. Let's shift gears, and I want to talk about something else that's very much in the news and recent, and that is obviously there's a new federal administration. One of the first things that President Trump did is sign an executive order around gender-affirming care, recognition of people who are transgender. I want to know, you have talked about one of your priorities is protecting access to reproductive and gender-affirming care. How do you intend to do that? What do you think the opportunities are within the Office of Insurance Commissioner, especially in light of the president's policies?
Well, that is the law in our state, and our charge at the OIC is to make sure that health plans live up to the law. So when someone is seeking that care, if it's denied, we're going to play a role in making sure that that care is not denied. The insurance companies are required to follow the law in our state, and that has been a priority for me. I voted for those laws when I was in the legislature, and irrespective of what the federal government is going to do, we still have the state laws, and the health plans are going to have to follow those here.
Is there anything, and this is, I realize you're the commissioner, insurance commissioner, you're also an attorney by training, is there anything that the federal administration could do that could test the state's ability to enforce those state laws? In other words, anything, no pun intended here, that could trump state law?
There's always something they could do to challenge it, of course. But I do think that we have a state that has been very proactive when it comes to standing up to abuses by the federal government. We did that in the past, in the first Trump administration, and I have no doubt that we'll do that again in this one.
So, bringing it back home to Washington State, the legislature is just getting underway. You've already testified before the legislature, I think more than once, and you've got legislative priorities for the 2025 session. One of them has to do with strengthening consumer protections by increasing insurer accountability for violations of the insurance code. Help us understand how things currently work if there is a alleged violation or found violation, and how you want to change the process to further empower consumers.
Yeah, well, right now what we can do is, we can issue a cease and desist order if there's a violation of the law. We can sue on it, bring them into court, or we could enter into a consent decree with the insurance company. But we can't make the insured whole. So in other words, the fines that we assess at the OIC on an insurance company for a violation of a statute go into our general fund. They don't make the insured whole. So there could be insureds that are harmed, and it leaves them with no other recourse but to go into court again. So they have to go through a second legal proceeding in order to be made whole, in cases where the insurance company does not voluntarily pay restitution, right?
And can you give us an example of what kind of violation we might be talking about here?
Yeah, if an insurer, for example, institutes rates that have not been approved by the insurance commissioner, they would have to, the insured would be entitled to have that money back. But we wouldn't have the authority to say when we found a violation of them, using unapproved rates, we would only be able to fine them, and that money would go to the general fund. We wouldn't be able to say, well, you've harmed 10,000 consumers in the process to the tune of $25,000. You're going to make each individual consumer whole by paying them back the premiums that you charged, right? We would not be able to do that. Those individual 10,000 policyholders would need to go into court. And in a lot of cases, the amount that's at stake, the premium amount could be substantial, or it could be very, very small. And if it's really, really small, it's going to be hard to find a lawyer who's going to want to take a case like that.
So
and
the change you want to make is?
Allow the insurance commissioner to simply say, after the fine has been imposed, and you're going to make these consumers whole as well. You're going to pay restitution to them. I think it's fair. I think it's an efficient way to handle a violation that has harmed a consumer. I think it's good consumer protection. And I think the consumers want us to make sure that their interests are protected. That's part of my statutory charge, right, is to act in the public interest. And there are other states that allow for the insurance commissioner to order restitution, and I think we should follow their lead.
What kind of fight are you going to have on your hands with the insurance industry over this bill?
Well, honestly, I did hear the industry's testimony, and I think it's less about restitution because they said, we already do this, so why would you object to something you already do? This law is for bad actors. It wouldn't be for those insurance companies that already make their insureds whole. I think it's more for the property casualty insurers. I think it's about the fact that we would like to modernize the fine schedule and put them on the same playing field.
This is another component of the bill.
Yes, correct.
Updating the fines.
Updating the fines. Well, it changes it from, per incident to a per violation. And, we're in a situation where we're a real outlier when it comes to this. 40 other states already have per violation
But that's
fines.
where you're sensing maybe some of the pushback.
I think that that's their concern. But I want, as I have said to them, there's a difference between an innocent mistake and intentional egregious behavior. Those things will be treated differently in my administration. And I don't think that the fine schedule is to be used in such a way that it is abusive on an insurer that makes a mistake, an innocent mistake. And a lot of times when they make a mistake, they will own up to it, and I want to encourage that. I would rather they come forward and we, work out a consent decree than we go into litigation with them.
This bill has a number of co-sponsors, and I realize it's early days yet, but what is your sense of its reception?
Well,
By lawmakers, that is, not by the insurance industry.
Yeah, I mean, at the House, there were some good questions that were asked, and there are some changes that I'm contemplating asking for. And I will be working with the prime sponsor, Representative Taylor, on that. And then we testify in the Senate on Thursday. And I certainly know many of those folks who are sitting on that committee. And I know that they will be very tuned in, and I know that they're also very interested in protecting consumers from bad actors. So again, this bill, like a lot of my bills, are not meant for people who do the right thing. They're really meant for the bad actor.
You also have some budget requests, and it's going to be a tough budget year. And as I understand it, primarily what you're trying to do is beef up staffing so that you can, around claims reviews and also around enforcing behavioral health parity compliance, which is the state requires insurance companies to cover mental health, behavioral health services, but you want to be able to enforce that more robustly. So these aren't giant requests, but again, kind of help us understand the foundation of these two requests and then kind of what you think the chances are given the budget situation.
Well, I think it's important to point out of the gate that we're not funded by the general fund.
So these requests need to be approved by the legislature, but the funds would actually
They come from our regulatory account, which is solely funded by a surcharge on insurance.
So you're just asking for permission to
Correct. We're
to tap
asking
these funds.
Exactly. We're asking them to appropriate money that we already collect, and if they don't appropriate that, the money does not go to the general fund. It goes back to insurance companies, 95% of which are out of state. So that doesn't do the consumer any good. And in terms of, the governor's executive order, because it sounds like you're heading in that direction, for the
6% across the board
Yes,
freeze or cuts,
yes.
yeah.
His order does accept out of there agencies that regulate financial services, which is exactly what we do. And the last thing you want is to take money away from an agency whose charge is consumer protection, because fraud and abuse and violations of the statute don't take a time out just because there's a budget crunch. And so it's really imperative for us to be out there and monitoring what the insurance companies are doing so that insureds are treated fairly.
So you want to create a new claims review team. This would be 3 full-time employees in response to a trend line, which is rising consumer complaints in property and casualty insurance, fueling consumer frustration over how their claims are being handled. So what would this claims review team do? And I understand it would be seeking resolution more than sort of a punitive fine structure or penalty structure?
I mean, the idea is that, we have a claims team that needs to have more people on it given the number of complaints that we're seeing. And it would be in order to speed up the process for the consumer and get those claims resolved much more quickly than what's been happening in the past.
And then on the behavioral health parity side, what's fueling this request? What's going on? What is your office observing that makes you think you need, in this case, I guess, 3 additional people as well?
Yeah, well, we know from data collection that there is a huge gap between what is paid for regular care and what's paid for mental health. And we did receive federal funding to help with that, and this is what we need to make sure that when people need behavioral health services, that they're able to access that. And we want to make sure that the insurers are following our behavioral health parity statutes. So that's really what's driving it, is really the desire to make sure that we're really, really bringing mental health treatment and access to treatment on par with other medical treatment.
Because that's the parity part, not just that you cover mental health treatment, but you pay at the same rate you'd be paying for
Well, yeah. I mean, I think
Medical care.
that that's really important. It took us until 2008 or 2009 just to pass the Mental Health Parity Act federally.
Yeah.
And I think that we are way behind, when it comes to understanding the importance of mental health treatment and good mental health and how that is foundational to everything else.
I want to ask you about auto insurance. You campaigned on trying to address the high cost of auto insurance, rising rates. It's something that's causing drivers a lot of heartburn and some pinch points in the pocketbook. What do you think you can do, at least in the short term, to try to stabilize or maybe perhaps drive down auto insurance rates?
It's a really good question because what's driving, the increase in auto premiums, quite frankly, are claims and the cost of claims. And we are driving cars that are much smarter now. They're way more costly to repair. And in some cases, like for, not trying to pick on Tesla, but I did have a conversation with insurers about the fact that when a Tesla comes in, they have to pay for empty bays on either side of it because of the potential for it to go up in flames. And so these are extra costs. There's also inflation. There's also supply chain issues. There's also, the cost of labor. All of that has gone way up. And so the costs of auto premiums have gone up accordingly. So what can we do? Well, this is part of what I want to do after session is over, is go around the state and talk to folks about their insurance needs and what they can do to reduce their premiums overall. Some of it is as simple as shopping around, adjusting your deductible, looking at your coverages. Do you need comprehensive coverage on an older car? Probably not. And things like that. And in the meantime, it's also going to be making sure that when there are rates that are filed with us, that they are actuarially sound. Now, that leads us to one of the requests that we'd like to get is an expert that can help us with AI and the AI that's used in creating the algorithms by the insurance industry when they are pricing auto premiums. And there will be a bill coming out, I think it's being dropped today, that will give us the order to study the impacts of credit scoring and other potentially discriminatory factors on auto premiums. And AI is part of that. And we need to have access to an expert so that we understand it. The staff is really excellent at the OIC in what they do, but we're not all experts in things like that. So that's one of the reasons we need it.
Well, and AI algorithms can be sort of a black box. But
Exactly.
You mentioned credit scoring, and I was going to ask you about that. There's been an ongoing conversation about whether insurance companies should be allowed to use credit scores to help set rates. And I was going to ask you your position on that. But what this bill would do is not change policy, but study the impact of credit scoring, and also take a look at kind of the role of AI algorithms in setting rates. Am I understanding correctly?
Well, yeah, it would give us the ability to look at,
To demand from the industry to say, show us sort of what's going on behind the scenes
yeah,
here, right?
and we're going to be analyzing it to see if it is
Provide us data.
unfair, yes, and whether it's unfairly discriminatory in its application. That's critical. That's part of our statutory charge as well. And it's important for me to know. I did sign on to a bill several years ago to ban the use of credit scores because of the research I had seen was very persuasive to me that it was being used in a discriminatory fashion. But I think this study will give us more of that evidentiary basis in order to make good law, one way or the other. And if, there are states right now that already ban it, and as far as I can see, the auto premiums are not appreciably different between those. Now, it's a little difficult, I suppose, to compare them apples to apples. But I do think it's worth looking at that, they haven't pulled out of those markets where it's been banned.
Okay. I want to just get to a last couple of questions and policies, things that you talked about on the campaign trail. I realize it's early days yet. You're just a couple of weeks into your tenure, and I imagine some of this is going to have to wait. But you had advocated, you are an advocate for single-payer universal health care. I don't imagine there will be a proposal to do that in 2025, but how are you thinking about starting to approach that in this role?
It's interesting that you say that, because I was asked about the federal government and whether, what were we preparing for when it came to health care? And I said repeal of the ACA. And
this is in terms of what could happen.
Correct.
With the new administration, Republicans in control of Congress, the Affordable Care Act could go away.
Right. And I think you're also seeing that there's going to be, changes to our healthcare system that I don't think are going to be helpful to consumers. But out of this kind of chaos or tragedy could come opportunity. And so while you're not going to see a bill to create single-payer health care this year, it is something that we're going to be working toward over the long haul, right? And as I said when I chatted with you several months ago, we created the Universal Health Care Commission in the legislature. I voted for that bill, and we intentionally put the insurance commissioner on that commission. And I'm coming to the commission with the perspective and the goal of creating either a blueprint or blueprints for the legislature to consider as we move toward making sure everyone has access to good quality health care that they can afford.
Just on this point, in the short term, do you see being kind of more in a defensive posture then because of what might be coming from the
Yes.
other Washington?
Yes.
And then longer term,
yes,
perhaps.
And we are already in that defensive posture, and my team is already on this.
Any plans? I know you had a proposal to require liability insurance for gun owners. Is there a concrete proposal for 2025 to mandate that?
Well, there is a different approach by Representative Reeves again that I have not had a chance to look at, but it looks like she takes a different approach that would end up getting to the same result. And if I would definitely support that. I think that it's important.
Remind us, is this taxing guns and ammunition?
I've not had a chance to look at her bill in
I know that there is a gun
detail.
safety sort of an idea of raising money to then put towards reducing, for instance, suicide risk. But
I just saw
I don't remember if that's her bill.
a brief.
But you don't have a bill for 2025.
No.
To require liability insurance for gun owners.
No,
okay.
Because of her bill, and I think if we can get to the same result with her bill, we don't need another bill.
Okay. Just lastly, I have a question about an administrative question.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that as you were getting sworn in, about a dozen people from your office were shown the door and did not get 2 weeks notice, as is OFM guidance for transition periods. Can you tell us what happened, why that decision was made? I know there's been some folks pretty upset about how that was handled. And obviously it's as a new elected official, you have the right to bring in your people, but the way this was handled has come under some criticism.
Yeah, there's no painless way to tell someone they no longer have a job. But I will say that we worked hard to see how we could give them as much time as possible. We even looked at paid administrative leave for a couple weeks. But after seeking Attorney General guidance, we were told that our options were extremely limited. And when you come into office, and the previous commissioner, and it was totally within his right and his prerogative, made it clear that no one was going to be exiting his administration before January 15th. But telling someone you're going to be gone in 2 weeks, you run the risk. You don't know how people are going to take that information, that message, right? To know that they will no longer have a job in 2 weeks. We can't pay them. If they stay on, you run the risk of something happening, whether it's a public safety risk or a risk to confidential proprietary information or the computer system. And remember, I practiced employment law for a very long time. And it was important to me that we followed standard employment practices in how we let people go and how we ended their employment. And I want to emphasize, they were not discharged for cause. This was not a firing, if you will. These were exempt employees, and I know the previous commissioner had, told folks, I don't know how many of you will be here on January 15th, right? So he had already let them know that. But it had been 24 years since there had been a transition, and I'm sure it was just hard. But it was, like I said, there's no easy way to do that. And in terms of having a staff member walk them out to the door, that's also very standard in the private sector. And it's just good employment practice to make sure that there's no other incident that could occur. Not that I was expecting it from anyone, but I don't want to be the first time it happens on my watch.
I know, I haven't looked at the OFM guidance myself, but I've been told that they do recommend during transition periods that you can give 2 weeks notice, and that sounds like other agencies have been able to give some notices. Again, is there a reason why you've just explained your concerns, but it doesn't seem like a standard practice, I guess.
Well,
to not give notice to people, hey, we're probably not going to have a role for you in this new administration.
Well, as I said, 2 weeks notice, we couldn't give them 2 weeks notice with pay. And that's what I had really wanted to do.
Just lastly, you're new in this role, you're heading into a long session. This insurance marketplace, whichever category we're talking about, is stressed right now, and consumers are stressed. What's your bottom line? What's your posture? And then, of course, there's the federal government aspect, which you've talked about. What is your sort of posture for these first, say, 6 months in office? How are you approaching this and thinking about it? Obviously, it started with a bang.
Yeah, it sure did. I bring a consumer protection perspective to the office, and that it's been known as a consumer protection agency for a long time, and I want to build on that. I want the consumer to think when they have an insurance issue, I want their first thought to be to call the insurance commissioner's office, to reach out to the insurance commissioner's office. I can tell you that when I went around the state and talked to folks, there were a lot of times people didn't know we had an insurance commissioner. But I think the educational outreach, the consumer outreach, consumer education, partnering with the industry in some cases on that, I think is really, really a critical and vital role that we play. We have at the OIC the SHIBA program, the State Health Insurance Benefits Advisors Program. It was the first in the nation created, and other states have since followed suit, but that's to help folks with Medicare Advantage plans, and that has been a big issue in our state. In fact, healthcare was the number one issue that I heard about when I was traveling around. And of that, a good 50% were Medicare Advantage plans. And I think the SHIBA program, which I think is a treasure, I think we need to make sure that we're giving our employees there at the OIC the resources and the tools that they need to act on behalf of the consumers of the state. And that's what I'm going to be focused on the first 6 months.
And is the governor's 6% cuts going to affect your ability to do that job and to serve consumers better?
Well, as I said earlier, we're not general fund. That's not how we have that's not our budget money. And the legislature does appropriate, but we are independently funded through the insurers.
So do you think you were exempt from that 6% haircut?
Well, he said that pretty much in his executive order when he said that he's accepting out those agencies that work
so you're viewing yourself
to regulate financial services.
Okay.
Well, he said that. And that is, we regulate that's what insurance is. They're financial services, so.
Okay.
But I will want to say one more thing, if you don't mind. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be mindful about expenses, and we are going to be looking to streamline our operations and become as efficient as possible. We've already combined 2 units, and we are definitely going to be looking at ways of making sure that we are as efficient and trimmed down as possible.
Okay. We'll leave it there. The newly sworn-in State Office of Insurance Commissioner, Patty Kuderer. Good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. When we return, how should Washington State regulate artificial intelligence? My next guest has some ideas. Back after this.
It will dwarf Katrina. It'll be absolutely the largest thing that we will have had to have dealt with in our country. We know the clock is ticking.
With only 15 minutes or so, that's not a lot of time to evacuate.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. Across the country, state lawmakers are moving to establish guardrails for artificial intelligence. Colorado last year passed a first-in-the-nation law focused on high-risk AI models that are used to make consequential decisions about people's lives, whether they can access housing, get a job, qualify for health care. Washington State has been taking a go-slow approach. The legislature last year established a task force to study the implications of AI on the state and make recommendations. But my next guest isn't waiting for that task force to finish its work. He's got a couple of bills in play for this year that borrow from laws implemented last year in California. Joining me now is State Representative Clyde Shavers, who serves on the state's AI task force and again is the sponsor of a couple of interesting pieces of legislation. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Before we dive into the specifics of the bills, explain what generates your interest in this topic. Why are you on the task force? Why are you thinking about AI and how Washington State should respond to this? Because frankly, there's a lot of other issues to occupy the time and minds of a state legislator. Why AI for you?
That's an important question. I believe as a legislator, as a public servant, one of our jobs is to look at the future, to solve tomorrow's problems today. And I think as we all can see and understand, acknowledge that the use of artificial intelligence, the development is rapidly growing. And so as we move forward into the future, I believe it's our duty, our responsibility to try to ensure that this technology, artificial intelligence in this case, is used to help, not harm us.
As I mentioned in the intro, other states are moving very quickly to set up pretty broad guardrails and especially address high-risk decision-making and the use of algorithms in that context. Washington's a tech-minded state. We have some of the largest tech companies in the world based here. Why do you think Washington State is not part of that conversation? I mean, we're seeing bills in Connecticut, Texas, Maryland, Vermont, California, and in many more.
Right.
Why not Washington?
My ultimate goal legislating in this space is to ensure balance. I think, like you mentioned, Washington State is on the forefront of technology. It has been for quite some time, along with other states like California. So while we need to acknowledge the enormous potential risks that artificial intelligence might bring, I think on the flip side, though, there are significant benefits and advantages of utilizing the immense power of artificial intelligence. So our office, and I believe Washington State, has been quite deliberative and intentional in moving forward in this space and ensuring that we foster innovation, but at the same time, we ensure that this technology, again, is used to help, not harm us. And so that's why I think we're taking a very intentional, deliberative approach that may seem slow, but I think is a smart way to move through this space.
Let me just play devil's advocate, because what I'm hearing from legislators in other states is, look, and to your point, this technology is already in use. It's already being used to screen resumes and to help companies make hiring decisions. It's already being used in the context of health insurance claims. The genie is out of the bottle, right? And so that, therefore, there is an imperative for legislators to move quickly now to try to get some guardrails around this, and that the intellectual conversation and the debate that is happening is how you do that without harming innovation, and that's happening in a pretty robust way right now. Again, don't we want to be part of that solution and not get left behind?
I think we are a part of that solution. I don't think we're getting...
Conversation is the word I was coming with.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting left behind. For example, the two bills that we're kind of pointing to right now is our bills, House Bill 1168 and 1170. These are quite comprehensive bills that address two fundamental values or principles that we all share. One is transparency and one is accountability. And so I think as we debate this bill, as it moves through the legislative process, the important thing that I believe we all need to recognize and allow is that it needs to be a collaborative process, right? There are industry folks, there are labor groups, and most importantly, the public, really looking at this and how do we address artificial intelligence in a amicable and collaborative way. So I don't think we're getting left behind. I think we're actually walking through this quite smartly.
Well, let's talk about these two bills. The first one would require developers of generative AI systems or services to post publicly information about the data used to train their system or service. Why is that? And that's the transparency bill. Why is that important? And again, as I mentioned, this borrows from a law that I think a first in the nation law that passed in California last year. Why is transparency around the training data vital?
I think the public, we all can agree, we want to know what kind of information is going into our artificial intelligence systems or services, right? We have the right to know that this kind of information is used to output whatever information that we're receiving. I think this is the beginning of us tackling this issue of transparency. I think in all technology, whether it's social media use or hardware like our phones, we should know what is behind the scenes so that we understand and can actually use this technology in a responsible way. Artificial intelligence, I believe, will be used in many facets of our life, whether now and into the future. And so as artificial intelligence starts creeping into different areas of our life, we should know what is behind that. And so I think this bill addresses that.
So can you give us a sense of if this were in place and this requirement mandated, and let's say somebody goes to use open ChatGPT, what kind of disclosure might be available to them? What would you learn as a user, and then why would that be useful?
Yeah, so some of the things that these companies like OpenAI that runs ChatGPT will be required to disclose is who are the owners of the information that they're grabbing for this text output.
So if they're training a bunch of data using New York Times articles,
Exactly.
that would have to be disclosed.
Yes. So we're talking about data sets, labeling, for example, of what is being used, and so that we understand, is this real, is this not? And shifting to House Bill 1170, that's more about what am I seeing? Is it real? Is it being generated by artificial intelligence? And that's kind of the back end of artificial intelligence.
So this bill, the second bill, requires providers of certain Gen AI systems to make an AI detection tool available to users so you can see whether something was created, generated, or altered by AI. We're talking mostly images, audio, video, I would imagine. And requires providers of, again, certain systems to offer users the option of including, when they're generating content, some sort of label that this was AI generated or altered. Is that the right? So that we were talking about transparency. Now we're talking about, how would you what bucket would you put this in?
I think it's accountability.
Accountability.
Yeah. As we all know, misinformation, disinformation can circulate quite quickly. And they can affect how we view the world, how we view certain current events. And so as artificial intelligence becomes more widely used, we really need to focus on what is real and what is not. I want to also say that this House Bill 1170 relates to entities that are public-facing or servicing 1 million visitors or more. And so these are really the large entities that have the capacity to be able to generate artificial images or video and audio, and ensure that we understand that this image was created by artificial intelligence, for example.
So let me ask you the same type of question. If this is implemented and then somebody goes to use one of these larger Gen AI models, how would the detection tool manifest itself? What would you see? Would you be hovering over something? And then if so, is there a pop-up that says this was created by Gen AI?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little bit more technical. So in the bill, there's the latent, for example, and disclosure information where, for example, in certain documents or images, there's the metadata behind, right? And so let's say a third-party developer grabs an image that was made by someone else or developed by someone else, they can automatically, using it's called an API, to understand that or acknowledge that, oh, this image that I just grabbed from a third-party source was actually artificially or used, is actually made through artificial intelligence. So I think that's where we see the sharing of ensuring that images and other documents, for example, are known to be, in this case, not real.
I know that there's some talk of creating a universal system of tracing the changes and the alterations to images, but more with the idea of allowing users to understand what's real as opposed to what's synthetic. And the one of the leading ideas is called C2PA, but essentially it's a watermark, but it's more than that, and it's something that Adobe and other companies have sort of coalesced around. Some states, I think, are going to introduce bills this year to require C2PA. So again, rather than labeling it synthetic, labeling it authentic, and then being able to follow the chain. So if alterations were made, you could know. Is that something you've been looking into? Is it something you're thinking about perhaps proposing? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence, because it's growing so rapidly, we are trying to catch up to the main developments. And so many states across the nation is trying to develop their own kind of bill based on what they see the future of artificial intelligence. These two bills, like you mentioned, have been developed quite aggressively in California, and we're using kind of that model. I think it's important to also recognize that as Google or Microsoft, as they start really delving into artificial intelligence, which they already are, I think it's important to have a congruent legal regime across different states so they don't have to comply with so many different laws that might be slightly different. That's also kind of my motivating spirit for this bill, to ensure that, hey, are we ensuring a comprehensive framework that companies can adhere to, not just in Washington State, but across the nation?
But let me again challenge you on this, that these proposals, while viewed as by advocates as perhaps some of the best bills that came out of California last year, are not being viewed as comprehensive in nature. For instance, they're not regulating these high-risk systems on the front end and putting requirements on developers and deployers and trying to guard against algorithmic discrimination. As you've said, it's about transparency and kind of accountability in terms of synthetic AI. But they're not comprehensive. And that's maybe going back to my original question. Why aren't we thinking right now about something more comprehensive in nature?
I think right now, in terms of the legislative process, in terms of policymaking and artificial intelligence, we need to first tackle what is fundamental. What values and principles do we all share that we could implement in artificial intelligence policymaking? And to me, this is kind of the beginning of the fundamental approach to legislating in this space. Now, I'm not saying this will be the end-all, be-all, and we're going to stop and say this is it. I think this is a beginning. And so as we move forward, as we ensure that this bill is collaborative, and at the very end, we all can say, hey, this is a good start to legislating in this space, I'm excited to continue working on more artificial intelligence bills for next year and many years to come.
I should note that these proposals, if they pass, would layer on laws we already have in place around deepfake transparency for election-related deepfakes and also intimate image deepfakes, which have both become issues. A lot of states have legislated on that. I believe there's a proposal this year to legislate against child sexual abuse material that's generated by AI that might not be covered by child pornography laws, existing laws. And then I understand there's a bill that's just been introduced around allowing state employees to collectively bargain around how AI might be deployed on the state, by the state. Are those sort of your two bills, the child sexual abuse material and perhaps the collective bargaining? Is that sort of set the table for what might occur in 2025 in terms of AI regulation in this state?
I believe so. And if you kind of read between the lines, these four bills really tackle issue areas that we really need to start thinking about.
The stuff you think is kind of the low-hanging fruit or the most pressing.
Exactly. And again, while they are most pressing, there are so many other issues that we will be tackling in the future, whether it's privacy or cybersecurity or workforce displacement. Artificial intelligence, again, will be everywhere. And it will shape how we live. it will shape how we see things. And so with that, I think, to me, we are really trying to solve, again, tomorrow's problems today.
I know that there's quite a lot of concern about companion chatbots, and there's some lawsuits against character AI over youth suicide in Florida, I believe, and some alleged harms to youth in Texas. There's a bill coming out in New York, and the governor there has made this a priority to regulate companion chatbots. There's a lot of bills to just require disclosure if you're interacting with an AI, a chatbot. Any proposals like that? What's your thinking about that kind of thing?
Yeah, so House Bill 1170 does not directly relate to text. Because again, while we can talk about video or audio or images, text is another kind of area of growth in artificial intelligence use. And we are talking about how do we also protect consumers from damaging texts or interactions with chatbots, like you mentioned. I think that's an area that we are slowly also tackling. I'm looking forward to working with industry and the public to ensure how do we, again, best approach this area, this growing area. As vice chair of the House Education Committee, I'm also seeing the prevalent use of artificial intelligence in homework assignments, for example, or studying. And I think that's also a challenge that we're trying to address. How do we ensure that our students are able to use artificial intelligence in a productive, positive manner, but that we're not developing or growing a generation of kids that can't think? I think
ChatGPT does it all for them.
Exactly, yeah. So,
what about the flip side of this equation, which is there is a state-to-state and a country-to-country global race here to lead in AI. There's states competing for the data centers, and there are states and countries competing to have the companies be based in their state. Should Washington, there's the Empire AI program in New York. It's sort of creating a supercomputer at one of the universities. And what is your thought about Washington State and whether the legislature needs to do anything to help the state be competitive?
Yeah, so on the other side, I'm also working on clean energy technology. So our office, we passed the first major fusion clean energy bill in Washington State last year, and we're working on the second bill this year as well. I think as artificial intelligence continues to grow, so does the need for energy for our data centers, for example. And I think that's the way we're also approaching it. How does the state promote clean energy technology as it aligns with the needs of more artificial intelligence use? And I think Washington State, with many fusion companies, is leading the way in that sense as well. So there are many different buckets that we're working to ensure Washington State's a leader in this area.
And then workforce development is the other one, and going back to education, training the students of today to be the workers in this field of tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, and my philosophy has always been, how do we provide more career learning opportunities for our kids, expose them to the possibilities of the future? And so that means expanding our CTE, our career technical education programs, so that our students can learn how to program one day, can learn the uses of artificial intelligence, can learn about clean energy technology in the environmental protection space. So at the same time, we are trying to grow a generation and generations of kids who understand how to use this technology responsibly.
So we have about 30 seconds left. As a member of the task force, what is the biggest takeaway that you've heard from? It's a big task force, a lot of voices, but is there something you've pulled from those conversations that kind of is top line for you?
Yes. I think for me, we need to utilize the knowledge, experience, the expertise of our members in our task force. The task force serves as a hub of that. And so I'm excited to continue working on this bill, ensuring that this bill continues to improve throughout the legislative process based on the comments and amendments from our task force members.
And the task force is leading Washington towards what ultimately, do you think?
Ethical use of AI.
Okay. We'll stop there. Representative Clyde Shavers, sponsor of 2 of the key AI bills in the state legislature this year. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. And thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We will see you again next week.